You think World War I was just trenches, barbed wire, and black and white photographs? Then how about a battle that killed 170,000 men in 5 days, and then refused to end? August 1914. East Prussia. The German 8th Army encircles the Russian 2nd Army near the village of Tannenberg. By the time the guns fell silent, 92,000 Russian soldiers were marching into captivity. 78,000 lay dead or wounded. The German victory was a masterpiece of military strategy. The Kaiser himself visited the battlefield. Hindenburg became a national hero. But something else began on that field. Something that the generals did not report and the textbooks do not mention. The local Masurian villagers had lived in these forests for generations. They knew the land. They knew the silence. After the battle, they noticed strange things. Soldiers walking through the mist, in old, torn uniforms, leaning on each other, bleeding. These soldiers never spoke. They never asked for help. They simply walked from one tree line to another and disappeared. The villagers stopped walking in the forest after dusk. They told their children to stay away from the old battlefield. In the 1920s, German authorities decided to build a massive memorial at Tannenberg, the Tannenberg Memorial, an imposing fortress-like structure of red brick. During the construction, workers repeatedly uncovered mass graves. They would excavate a pit, remove the bodies, fill it back in, and the next week, bones would surface again. Not from the same pit. From a different location. As if the dead were moving underground. The foreman reported the problem to his superiors. He was told to keep quiet and continue building. The memorial was completed in 1927. President Paul von Hindenburg himself chose to be buried there in 1934. But his grave did not stay undisturbed. In 1945, as the Soviet army approached, German troops blew up the memorial and removed Hindenburg's coffin to the west. The ruins were demolished in the 1950s. Today, only a few piles of rubble remain. But the forest remembers. Now we must talk about the forest floor itself. In 1952, a Polish forester named Andrzej Kowalski was marking trees for logging near the old battle lines. He carried a standard military issue compass, simple, reliable, Soviet-made. As he walked into a small clearing, his compass needle began to spin. Not drift, spin continuously, like a clock hand stuck at noon. He stepped back. The needle stopped. He stepped forward. It spun again. The clearing was roughly 50 meters in diameter. Inside it, the soil was different, darker, softer, almost spongy. Outside the clearing, the soil was normal forest dirt, sandy, dry, full of pine needles. Kowalski reported the anomaly to his supervisor. The supervisor laughed. Kowalski never forgot. Years later, he told his son, it felt like walking on a grave. A very large grave. And the grave was breathing. In 1964, a highway construction project began near the village of Hohenstein, now called Olsztynek. A bulldozer operator named Jan Drzewiecki was clearing a section of forest when his blade hit something hard. He climbed down. The blade was stuck in a layer of compacted bone. Not one bone. Hundreds of bones. Layer after layer, mixed with dark earth and fragments of cloth. The archaeologists who arrived at the site were not prepared for what they found. The mass grave was large, roughly 20 meters long, 5 meters wide, 4 meters deep. The bodies were Russian soldiers. Their uniforms had brass buttons and Cyrillic markings. But the bodies were not lying flat. They were standing. Upright. Shoulder to shoulder, facing east, as if they had been buried while still on their feet. Some had their rifles propped beside them. A few had their hands still on the stocks. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Kazimierz Radziwiłł, wrote in his journal, "It appears that these men were thrown into the pit while still alive, and they pushed themselves upright, trying to climb out. The earth buried them standing. But there were no signs of struggle. The bodies were neatly arranged. The rifles were carefully placed. One of the workers, a former soldier, whispered, "This is not a grave. This is a parade ground." They were ordered to stand. And they obeyed. The excavation was halted by the local authorities. The bones were removed, there were hundreds of them, and reburied in a military cemetery several kilometers away. But before the removal, a young journalist managed to take a single photograph. The photograph showed rows of standing skeletons, arms at their sides, facing east. The journalist sent the photo to a newspaper in Warsaw. The editor refused to publish it. He said, "The public is not ready for this." The photo was lost. The journalist died in 2001. His family found the negative in a shoebox. It is now kept in a private collection, unseen for decades. Now we move to the 1980s. The Cold War. Poland was still behind the Iron Curtain. A group of German schoolchildren from the city of Hamburg went on a field trip to the Tannenberg battlefield, an educational journey sponsored by their history teacher. They were allowed to camp overnight in a designated area near the former memorial ruins. At around 11 p.m., one of the students, a boy named Lucas, turned on his cassette recorder to capture the sounds of the forest for a school project. The recorder was a standard Grundig model, with a built-in microphone and automatic level control. For the first hour, the tape recorded normal camp sounds, boys talking, a fire crackling, an owl in the distance. Then, at about 12:15 a.m., the recorder picked up something else. A voice. Male. Speaking in Russian. The words were faint, as if coming from a great distance. The voice said, "Vody. Date nai vody. Water. Give me water." Then another voice, also Russian, replied, "Nai mazish. My myertvi. You cannot. We are dead." The boys heard nothing. The recorder was on a log, 3 meters from the campfire. No one touched it. The next morning, Lucas played back the tape. The class gathered around. They heard the voices. Their teacher confiscated the tape. He said it was a radio interference artifact. He gave the tape to the local Polish authorities. Years later, after the fall of communism, Lucas, now a man, tried to recover the tape. He contacted the Alston State Archive. The archive said they had no record of any such tape. The teacher was dead. The tape was gone. But Lucas had made a copy. A low-generation copy, recorded onto a cheap cassette. He played it for a journalist in 2005. The journalist described the voices as unmistakably human, unmistakably Russian, and unmistakably recorded in a place where no one was speaking. A phonetic analysis was performed by a specialist at the University of Warsaw. The specialist concluded, the voices are authentic. The language is pre-revolutionary Russian, the dialect of soldiers from the Tsarist army. The recording contains no artifacts of radio transmission. It appears to have been recorded acoustically, in an open space, at night. The specialist added, "I cannot explain this. There were no people present." The recordist confirms this. But the voices are real. Now we go deeper. Into the forest itself. In 1998, a Polish-German research team conducted a geophysical survey of the battlefield area. They used magnetometers, ground-penetrating radar, and electromagnetic field sensors. They were looking for unmarked graves, a humanitarian effort to give fallen soldiers a proper burial. What they found instead was a large, persistent electromagnetic anomaly, a region where the magnetic field was 300% stronger than the surrounding area. The anomaly was roughly circular, about 200 meters in diameter, centered on the spot where the heaviest fighting occurred. Inside the anomaly, the radar showed something strange. The soil layers were disrupted, not by digging, but by a kind of vertical displacement, as if something had pushed up from below. The team leader, Dr. Eric Strauss, wrote, "The underground structure is unlike any known geological or anthropogenic feature. It appears to be a cylindrical shaft, filled with compacted soil and organic material, extending downward beyond the depth of our instruments." The team drilled a core sample from the center of the anomaly. The core came up dark, blackish brown, with an oily sheen. Lab analysis showed the presence of adipocere, grave wax, mixed with fragments of bone and cloth. But the age of the organic matter was inconsistent. Some carbon-14 dates placed it at 1914. Others came back as modern, 1950s, 1960s, even 1980s. As if the grave had been receiving bodies for decades after the battle. Strauss wanted to expand the survey. He applied for additional funding. His application was denied. A year later, he was told that the German-Polish Military History Commission had classified his findings. No reason was given. Strauss retired in 2003. He now lives in a small town in Bavaria. He does not discuss Tannenberg. When asked, he says, "Some things are better left underground." Now we must talk about the witnesses. The ordinary people who saw things they could not explain. Maria K., a Polish woman who lived near the battlefield until her death in 2010, gave a taped interview to a local journalist in 1986. She described walking to church one morning in 1943, during the war, when she saw a column of soldiers marching across a field. They were not German. They were not Soviet. Their uniforms were gray-green, with high boots and flat caps. Like the old Tsarist army. She counted about 30 men. They walked in step, their boots making no sound on the dirt road. The fog was thick. They came out of the fog and walked into the fog on the other side. Their faces were gray. Not pale, gray, like clay. She asked a neighbor who was walking behind her, "Did you see that?" The neighbor shook his head. No. He had seen nothing. Maria was not the only one. Dozens of similar reports exist in the local archives, scattered, uncatalogued, ignored. In 1978, a Polish border guard named Stefan J. was patrolling the restricted zone near the former battlefield, a forest area that had been declared off-limits due to unexploded ordnance. He saw a man in a long coat standing by a birch tree. The man was not moving. Stefan called out, "Who's there?" The man turned. His face was missing. Not disfigured, missing. Where his features should have been, there was only smooth, gray skin, like a mannequin. Stefan ran. He did not stop until he reached his vehicle. He reported the incident to his commanding officer. The officer wrote a short report, labeled it psychological stress, and filed it away. Stefan was given 3 days of leave and told not to speak of it. He never went back to that sector. He retired early. He died in 1995. His daughter found the report among his papers. Now the strangest story of all. The story that connects Tannenberg to the war that never ended. In 1940, during the Nazi occupation of Poland, a German Wehrmacht unit was stationed near the Tannenberg Memorial. Soldiers from the unit reported hearing gunfire at night. Not artillery, rifle shots, isolated, spaced irregularly, as if from a skirmish. They sent a patrol to investigate. The patrol returned, shaken. They reported seeing men fighting in a clearing, dozens of them, in uniforms they did not recognize. The patrol called out. The figures did not respond. One of the soldiers fired a flare into the air. The light illuminated the clearing, and the figures vanished. The patrol commander wrote in his log, "The enemy was not of this world. We were not meant to see them." The log was classified. After the war, it was captured by the Soviet army and sent to Moscow. Its current location is unknown. One final story. August 2014. The centennial of the battle. A group of history enthusiasts, reenactors from Germany, Poland, and Russia, organized a commemorative march across the battlefield. They carried flags, laid wreaths, and held a brief ceremony at the site where the Tannenberg Memorial once stood. As they turned to leave, one of the Russian reenactors, a man named Dmitry, stopped. He pointed at the field. "Look," he said. The others looked. They saw nothing. But Dmitry insisted, "There are men walking there. Row upon row. They are marching east. Dmitri had been a soldier in the Soviet-Afghan War. He had seen men die. He was not prone to fantasy. He took out his phone and snapped a photograph. The photograph showed only an empty field. But when he reviewed the image later, he noticed something. In the corner of the frame, a faint, semi-transparent figure, a soldier in an old-style uniform, with a rifle over his shoulder. Dmitri showed the photo to a journalist. The journalist published it online. Within hours, the journalist received a legal notice demanding the photo be removed. It was removed. Dmitri still has the original. He does not show it to anyone. He says, "That man in the photo, I know him. He looks like my great-grandfather, who was killed at Tannenberg in 1914. Now we close. Tannenberg is a place of contradictions. A great German victory that eventually led to defeat. A forest that was cleared of bodies, but the bodies refused to leave. The standing skeletons. The spinning compass. The voices on the tape. The figure with no face. The phantom column marching through the fog. What unites them? Not the supernatural. Not a curse. Something more frightening. Some historians believe that intense trauma can be imprinted on a landscape, that the electromagnetic fields generated by mass death can create a kind of recording, replaying under the right conditions. If that is true, then Tannenberg is not haunted. It is broken. The land itself was wounded. And it has not healed. The forest floor still breathes. The graves still shift. The soldiers still march, row upon row, in gray-green uniforms, toward an east that no longer exists. And if you ever walk through that meadow, on a foggy morning in late August, and you hear the sound of boots on wet earth, do not turn around. Do not call out. Do not try to help them. They are not lost. They are on duty. And they have been on duty for over 100 years. Subscribe if you want to hear the next story. A submarine that left port in 1944 and never came back. But its radio keeps broadcasting. The most frightening thing about Tannenberg is not that 170,000 men died there. It is that some of them never left. And some of them were never dead at all, just waiting. The forest knows. The forest remembers. And the forest has time.